So today we have Arctic Wolf and ASMGi, and we have Steve Racing, CEO of ASMGi, and Dimitri Sandler from Arctic Wolf. So Steve, why don't you take it away and let's get started.
Great, thank you, Paul, and thanks to all of you attending the webinar for sharing your time with us today. Just a great topic, and I'm really happy to be here. And how to stop cyber attacks with the MDR, a modern MDR and a managed SOC solution, and fighting the bad guys. We're all fighting the good fight. So it's a great topic, and I'm really excited to be here. And I'll tell you what I'm really excited about is having an expert panel together with me, and my guest speaker today, Dimitri Sandler. But I am Steve Racing, President and CEO of ASMGi, and joining me today is Dimitri Sandler, Director of Pre-Sales Engineering for Arctic Wolf. So Dimitri, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Arctic Wolf?
Sure, thanks, Steve. So my name is Dimitri Sandler. So I'm based out of Chicago, and I run the pre-sales engineering or the sales engineering team for Arctic Wolf for our Great Lakes territory. Been in security for a few years, both kind of at Arctic Wolf for a little bit, and prior to that, I was actually in a Kubernetes security-based company as well. But my job is to essentially lead a team of technical experts in security that help customers understand their security journey and where the gaps are around any security holes that might exist in their environments, and really understand how Arctic Wolf is a platform that can deliver them a better overall security posture and help them within their security journey.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to have you with us today, Dimitri. And I should mention that ASMGi is an Arctic Wolf partner, and we're very excited about our relationship together and just the things that Arctic Wolf does combined with the things that we do. We feel really strongly about delivering value to our customers, and just very excited about the relationship and those kind of things. So thank you for all of that. Before we jump in, I want to mention one thing. Today's webinar is actually part of a series, right? So we decided to break, instead of trying to cram everything into a 60-minute webinar, we would create a series and break it functionally into three parts. So this is webinar 1 of 3. The other 2 parts are managed risk, which will happen on March 25th, and cloud security, which will happen on April 8th. And so I do want to mention, Paul mentioned entering questions in the Q&A box. If you are interested in attending the whole series, we're more than happy to register you and do the work for you, right? So all you need to do in order for that to happen is just enter yes in that question box and submit that, and we'll get you registered for the webinars, and you'll receive an email confirmation and all those things. But what are we going to talk about today? Well, just security has a problem, I think, today, and we're gonna highlight that a little bit and just go through some quick facts about the attacks and the state of cybersecurity in the world today. Can't do MDR without SOC, so we're gonna dig in on that a little bit, and then we're gonna focus on what's special about Arctic Wolf, and I'm really excited about that part. And then also we want to talk about what is ASMGi's MDR and SOC Plus program. And again, this is based on Arctic Wolf, and so what we say is it's powered by Arctic Wolf in that regard. And so all of the things that apply that we talk about today are certainly part of that program. And then we'll go through some key takeaways and open it up for question and answer. So please feel free, again, to input questions, and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. So sound good? So is there a problem with cyber today? Here's the nature of the industry, quite honestly, right? So I wouldn't want to be a buyer. Well, I am, quite honestly, but it's hard. It's hard to be a buyer of cybersecurity today because there are so many options available, right? I get hundreds of emails a day that say, hey, just buy this, hey, just buy that, right? It's tough, but there are a lot of options and a lot of vendors, and probably even more than 3,000 today. $120 billion. There's a lot of money being spent on cybersecurity. There's no question. And yet, in spite of that, there's 3,400 reported breaches, right? So it seems like there's a problem somewhere. What do you think, Dimitri?
Yeah, I'd say the interesting thing here too is, right, 3,400 are the reported breaches, which really means there's a lot more, because let's be honest, there are a lot of times where we have no idea that we have been breached, right? And that's part of the problem, is a lot of times we don't even know, or don't know for a very long time. And so Steve, I think to your point, it almost becomes challenging in that, right? We have all of these tools, we have all these vendors, and most of them are actually really great tools. So we keep buying more stuff, we keep spending more money, but clearly that in itself, right, just having the tools isn't necessarily working, right? So the way that we kind of all look at this problem is it's not a problem of the tools, it's a problem of operationalizing all of that technology, right? So it's an effectiveness problem of that whole ecosystem, right? It's not the tools, it's how we can actually leverage all of them together and really paint that overall picture versus just having a lot of the different tools in place and saying, yep, I checked that box.
Yep, right. Yeah, no argument. We have a whole talk track about effectiveness, right? And checking to make sure that your tools and your controls are actually effective at doing what they're designed to do. This I love this this thought process and just kind of mapping the evolution of cybersecurity. But what do you think about this and where we are today, Dimitri?
I think, right, it's kind of that the two-sided fight, right? So it used to be a lot simpler in the early 90s where, right, you have a firewall in place in your data center, you have some antivirus tools, and the attack vectors and the attack techniques were a lot simpler. So, right, it's that ever continuous battle of the tools we put in place and the procedures we put in place and the attackers that figure out new ways. And so we saw that evolution where, we put some things in place in the early 90s, the attackers found new exploits, right? So then we went to next gen tools, next gen firewalls, next gen antivirus, and then they got better too. And so we started seeing these security platforms. And so this continuous evolution has really come to this consensus of you really need again, back to that operational effectiveness problem. You really need a full security operations mentality and a security operations approach to all of this versus, right, the attackers have continued to advance. And so we've got these new platforms in place. They've gotten better. We now need a new way to keep them at bay. And that's really that whole security operations kind of fully wrapped approach that we're going to talk about.
That's right. And it isn't like it's a secret what tools are available.
No,
so
unfortunately not.
There's no question. I wanted to talk about this a little bit because I think this is really applicable to where we're at. And these are, some historical data breaches, right? And it's exactly what you've been talking about. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit on, common ground.
Yeah, I'd say, every one of these attacks was absolutely different, which is what makes it interesting, right? Again, it's not just one way that hackers are getting to these breaches. The other thing that's interesting to me is, right, these are all very large companies that have, again, right, they have the tools, they have the money to spend on those tools, and, right, all of the try to like put all the procedures in place, and yet they're still getting hacked, they're still getting breached. And the interesting thing that kind of combines all of these, and we can go into the details of each one, but these are all things that could have been prevented, right? It wasn't that the tools weren't in place. They just weren't listened to all the time, right? There's just too much noise. There's too much stuff going on, and things got missed, not because the tools weren't in place, but because there's almost too many tools and not enough people to deal with all of that, right? And to me, that's very interesting.
Yeah, honestly, I think it is as well. And what jumps out from the Jack Daniels breach is the fact that they were there for a month, which is a lot less than the average time. There's no question, but that's a long time to figure out how to do damage, right?
Yeah.
That's and just all of them, like you said, are very preventable. Finding vulnerabilities and not fixing them and then having a breach, it's just and all of these are companies that should know better and can afford to do better, quite honestly, right? But bad things still happen. And so I think there's a huge gap, and that's really what jumps out from my perspective on that. I wanted to mention ransomware because I really think it's top of mind for everybody today, and rightfully so, quite honestly, right? So the intention of ransomware is to put the lights out basically and pay the ransom and we'll turn them back on. That's what it boils down to. And what we talk about all the time is just the bad guys just want to get paid, right? But some of these stats are just staggering. If you think about in 2021, which is right now, every 11 seconds, an attack happens. That's almost 8,000 attacks per day worldwide. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. You think about it. 70% of those are happening in the US. So it's a boatload of attacks, quite honestly. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting from this study, the bad guys, they don't really care if you're a healthcare company, if you're banking and finance or manufacturing. It's just anybody and everybody. And I think the dispersion across all industries is quite interesting and really speaks volumes to that. So anything to add to this, Dimitri?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? And we've talked about this before. They don't care who you are. They just want your money, right? It doesn't matter to them what business you're in. You're a target. Everybody's a target just as much as the next guy. So
that's right. So we had a couple of key findings, and these are specific from Arctic Wolf customers. So why don't you just kind of walk us through these? Because I think it's interesting, the points that are made here.
Yeah, so we publish a security report, right? So we do a lot of analysis, obviously being in the security space ourselves. We do a lot of analysis on what's going on, and just high level, we'll touch on a few trends. But one of the things that was interesting is that with all of the changes that happened last year, we saw a massive spike in account takeover incidents, right? So over 400% increase in account takeover incidents. And a lot of this has to do with, right, passwords being reused, clear text passwords, right? So again, not that tools aren't there, but not everybody's always following the right procedures and policies. And so this again becomes a huge issue as we look at, right? I mean, a staggering amount of account takeovers. And once they're in, that's it, right?
Bad things are going to
have your account, they can log in, and now they've got free
they have somebody's credentials. That's the other thing, right? So most of the tools that are put in place to prevent them, they're a valid account. They're probably not going to work.
Exactly.
That's
you just logged in. Congratulations, right? We validated it.
That's right. What's interesting to me about this graph is just the trend, right? How huge the increase is, and the fact that it's consistent, right? It's very consistent.
Yep.
This is an interesting topic as well, right?
Yeah, it's hackers aren't dumb, right? They know when you sleep and they know when you don't. And so whether it's looking at weekdays versus weekends or time, right? The threats that we detect within our customers, the attacks that are attempted, unsurprisingly, right, they fall when we're not paying attention.
That's right.
Because, right, they know, right? So it's going to be Friday through Sunday, and it's going to be at night. Again, not because the tools aren't there to detect it, and right, the tools are there, but we're not, right? So they're smart. They know when is the most likely opportunity that presents itself. So.
Yeah. And the other thing that's interesting to me, like Friday at 6 p.m., get in the network and take a couple of days to look around and figure out how to make this hurt really, really bad, right? So how do you make this painful? So when you show up for work on Monday, you log into your computer and you see your ransomware screen, and you pretty much have to pay because you gave the guy 2 days to just cruise around your network and find out. And that's when nobody's looking, right? But this, I like the metaphor of the home security, right? If you go on vacation and you have home security, the cops are still going to show up if somebody breaks the window, right? If you don't have home security, then they're not going to show up.
Yeah, so you're not going to know until you get back home, right? And it's too late.
Back home, and it's too late. That's right.
So this was an interesting stat too, and this, a lot of this has to do with the events of last year. But we saw a huge spike in phishing with ransomware. And let's be honest, right? As current events change, as political topics change, there are people that unfortunately want to take advantage of that. And so we saw a huge spike, especially around COVID-related phishing ransomware attacks in the spring. Right? People are going to prey on our emotions, and so we have to be vigilant around that, and really have to keep that in mind as well.
Right. And the mentality of the bad guys, this is just the way it works, right? Yeah. Fraud, unemployment fraud during COVID, it's just running rampant, and
they're not the most ethical and moral bunch.
That's right. That's right. Get paid. It's a business. And then I think this is the last one in this sequence, but Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
and again, very related to the events of last year, but the unsecured Wi-Fi networks, we've probably all connected to one in the airport, in a hotel, right? Somewhere. And that's a huge, huge attack vector, right? So an open Wi-Fi network can be a very simple way for somebody to get into your system as a starting point. And then again, once you're on your company's network, they have free reign. And what we actually found interesting with this was as more and more folks were working from home, we saw an increase in this, which actually also means a lot of folks' home networks are also unprotected.
Right.
Something you want to keep in mind, not just in the workplace,
Right.
but also at home. You want security wherever you go. But it was a really interesting stat, but very simple attack vector for hackers.
Yep, that's a great point that you made as well. So I wanted to just touch a little bit on the kind of the alphabet soup and the acronyms that are going around the cyber world today, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on the difference between a SIM and a SIM.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make it any easier, that right? SIM, 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 all sound about the same. So just really high level, right? So security information management is really about getting the log data and being able to analyze it, right? So SIM with security information management is, like it says, right? It's long-term storage as well as some analysis of the log data in your environment. The security event manager component of it, or the security event management, is the real-time monitoring and correlation of any events that come out of that. And so when you combine those two, you get what we now call SIEM, right? But that's, again, security information and event management. And it's really looking, the process is essentially combining the log aggregation correlation with the real-time monitoring and visibility and action on top of that. So it's getting the data, looking at it, and then doing something about it and understanding what that data actually is.
Yep. And the other interesting thing about this is that the amount of data is just staggering, right? So the number of devices that create data is increasing, and the amount of data that they each create is increasing.
Yeah.
So it's very hard and difficult, forget about correlate events, just to review the logs and see if there's suspicious activity and those kind of things. So what about the SOC side of it?
Yeah, right. So SOCs, what SOCs and security, what's that all about? So a SOC or SOC, Security Operations Center, is really now looking at a functional group and entity within an organization, but it's really about people, processes, and technology, right? So you have to have all three of those components, and you have to have a continuous approach to this, right? So it's not just bringing a couple of those things together. You have to have the people in place to implement all of these technologies, and then also continuously monitor and view them and respond to them. You have to have the processes, the run books in place, and you still have to have the technology. You have to have all the tools. So a security operations center is really that combination and bringing everything together, right? It's not just a tool or a set of tools. It's bringing everything together to have a really full 24/7 deep level understanding and response capability to everything that's going on in the environment.
Yep. Yeah, there's no doubt. So we definitely are in the world of acronyms, and it's a little bit of an alphabet soup when you start just thinking about all of these different functional areas, and they all mean something slightly different, right? And I think in our agenda, that's why I framed it up that way. You can't do MDR without a SOC, right? It's impossible to do, to detect incidents without having all of those components that you just talked about. So I think we covered a lot of these things in your previous slides, except for like the EDR, right? So
yeah.
And I get asked this all the time. What's the difference between an EDR and an MDR? Right?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And again, it doesn't help that, right, as with all acronyms, it can mean different things to different people, but EDR is really focused on endpoint detection and response, right? So there's some great technologies and tools out there that focus specifically on the endpoints and looking at, again, typically, right, your laptops, especially as everybody's working remotely, but they're specifically looking at just that workstation and trying to protect that workstation, which is a great requirement and a great functionality to have. but it's just one small aspect
Right.
of the overall security posture.
Right.
Whereas managed detection and response is really taking a step back and looking at how do we look at the broader picture, where endpoint is a part of that. But again, there's so much more in our environment than just the endpoints. So we need to look at it from a broader perspective.
Yep, and I think that's a critical thing. And then the only other thing that I'll mention about this is the SOC as a service and managed SOC. So you talked a little bit about SOCs, and people talk about security operations center all the time. It can be in-house or it can be outsourced or it could be, but if it's managed, it's likely outsourced. And if it's SOC as a service, it's an outsourced service. But this is, what I always say is, leave it to the people that do this all the time, right? And don't try to build from scratch, because there's so many components. And I think we're going to get into the complexity a little bit later. But when you start thinking about everything that's involved for a SOC to really operate, right? That's I think that complexity really jumps out at you. But why don't you just kind of walk us through all of these different functional components?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest, it didn't really hit home for me until I saw this on a slide, right? I had, worked with security operations centers in my past, but
Couldn't
when
fit
you
it
look
all.
at this, it makes it pop and like, oh yeah, right. So we talked about the SIEM, right? And you'll notice this is just one component of that overall security operations center. The challenge is there's so much more that has to go into that full operations center, right? You have to have, again, the log collection and aggregation and correlation capabilities, but you also have to have an R&D team or department even, right? That is continuously looking at what's going on, and then again, building new workflows and looking at how to adapt to what's going on. You have to have the ticketing process systems in place and the processes around that. An ever-evolving knowledge base, right? So, hey, we just detected something, we've remediated it, now we need a knowledge base. It's this continuous, right, evolving interaction. You have to have continual threat hunting, right? You can't just assume everything is fine. You have to continuously be actively looking at any holes. And then again, right, kind of ramping into the tuning, reporting, you have to be able to understand what's going on. And this is really, it is circular in nature, because right, not only is it 24/7 around the clock, but all of this is a continuous process. And one of the big challenges with this is it takes a lot of people, right? Forgetting all of the standard resources, it takes a lot of people power to put a security operations center in place and to maintain it, because it really is a lot of different components beyond just having the SIEM, having the logs, so to say.
Yeah. And one part that was a little bit surprising to me, but then again, not when I thought about it, but I hadn't really seen it, but the R&D piece, right? So how do you even know what to look for, right? You have to keep up and do, it's not just about saying, hey, I have threat intelligence and I know everything that there is to know, because that might, even if that's true today, which it probably isn't, right? It won't be true tomorrow. That's you have to have a mechanism for continuously evolving with current threats, right?
And one of the challenges that we obviously solve as well is when you're focused on just what's in your environment, you have no idea what's happening across everybody else in the world.
Right.
So if somebody gets an attack, they might have their R&D team, right? They might have some solution or fix to this and some knowledge. You don't.
That's right.
So that becomes a huge challenge as well if you're living in a very isolated world from that perspective.
Yep. And just even knowing about out-of-band vulnerabilities that are being exploited in the wild is huge, right? And so we get a lot of alerts from your team, Dimitri, and it's so helpful. Like we immediately share them, and it's just really helpful to be able to know that, hey, there's a vulnerability, whether it's Microsoft or some other third-party piece of software that's being exploited in the wild. And guess what? There's some bad guys that are just attacking this a lot in this part of the world, and it's going to be in the U.S. in any minute, right? So patch it immediately, and we've been able to jump on things like that. So I wanted to just kind of transition here, because people are such a critical component in the operational aspect of a SOC. I think it often gets left out, right? If we create this belief that if we have all this technology, right? That we don't need people anymore, and it's such a critical piece to the equation. I mean, what do you think?
It's again, right? You can have the tools, but if you don't have enough people, and this is a common problem that we encounter, right? Is there's a small group that's staffing a SOC, and let's be honest, they just don't have the time and wherewithal to deal with all of these things. So ultimately, you have to choose, right? What are you going to prioritize? Right. The problem with that is they're all top priorities. That's right. And the moment that you have to choose is the moment that you've just left yourself vulnerable to an attack. And that's really what we see often with customers. It's not that they don't have security in place. They don't have the people and kind of the resources to really do all of this continuously. Yeah. And that's when things break down.
Yeah. And people ends up being a large element of cost when you start, if you do a total cost, total cost of ownership analysis on building versus buying, outsourcing the SOC services piece. And, the part I always go to is there's 21 shifts in a week, and you likely don't want one person on a shift. We just had 2 people on a shift. You can start to consider,
And I'll tie this back to one of the earlier slides too, right? If you think back to all of those large companies, they have a lot of people, right? And even with those teams, things still slip through. And as we talked about earlier, it wasn't a technology problem. It ultimately was the people just had to choose what they dealt with. And that's what led to a lot of the problems, right? They didn't deal with the right alert or the right vulnerability in time because they had to prioritize other things. So it does become a people problem to a large extent as well.
Yep. So we'll start to really comprehend how complex this is when we see the next couple of slides, because there's so much information here. We could spend the entire conversation just on this slide, quite honestly. But maybe you can just take us through what all of these different elements are.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Steve mentioned, right, everybody's going to have a copy of these slides, and we would love to have a deeper discussion with anybody together as a team to really dig into all of the nitty-gritty details, because to Steve's point, there's a lot of stuff here. But at the end of the day, as we look at managed detection and response from an Arctic Wolf perspective, there are a couple ways that we approach this. So one is we do have an on-prem sensor. So this is an appliance that will go just behind your firewall that is able to aggregate a lot of different data points, right? So we talked about, right, kind of endpoint detection is just focused on the endpoints. We're looking at everything on your network, right? So we have direct visibility onto your network, but we're also looking at AD, DNS. You can send any syslog event to us as well. So we are kind of that centralized log and data aggregation. We're looking at network flow data, IP fix, firewall logs. We're aggregating all of this data and sending that into a cloud-based SOC as a service, right? So a cloud-based environment that is managed and run by Arctic Wolf. And so that in itself extends the visibility very, very broadly. And that's a key component of this, right? Is if you really want a true solution, it can't be just about a part of your environment. You have to look at essentially all of those different components. At the same time, we also have an agent that can be loaded on your servers or right at your endpoints. That is, again, extending EDR tools that you might have in place as well. And that's helping with, asset management, but one of and log aggregation as well. But one of the other things where we can really help with that is manage containment, right? So if there is a breach, if somebody's laptop, for example, gets hacked, we can automatically contain that laptop or server or any entity where you have that agent, right? And that gets into the response component, right? So not only do we have the visibility and the detection, but we're also managing the response component. So we can isolate that entity from the rest of the network so that that doesn't spread to the rest of your environment, to the rest of your users. Yeah. And then again, we're also extending this to cloud environments, whether that's your G Suite Office 365 environment, if you're running IaaS, right? So if you're running in cloud of Azure, AWS, we also added GCP recently as well. We're able to connect to those via API as well. And again, start collecting log data from there, as well as you can see, right? Things like Okta, Salesforce, endpoint detection. So again, we're looking at this from a very broad range of data aggregation, data collection, because we need to have that full picture. That's a technology stack, right? The thing that I want to focus on though as well is that concierge security team at the top, because we talked so much about, right, the people problem. This is one of the fundamental differences of Arctic Wolf, is that not only do we have the technology in place to capture all the data, and we have some really robust technologies, right, to sift through the noise and really understand what's a threat, what's not. But what we offer is a really unique perspective on that interaction from a human angle. So we have what we call our ISOC, which is staffed by over 300 different security engineers 24/7 that are sifting through this data. And then every one of our customers also has a dedicated concierge security team. So this is a dedicated team of 2 to 3 individuals that are essentially an extension of your company, of your team, that really work to understand your environment, but also your internal product roadmaps and infrastructure roadmaps, et cetera, and fine tune everything specific to your environment. And again, deal with any alert triage or remediation, custom rules, anything that you're looking to do to continue to evolve and extend this platform. So they really become an extension of your team as part of now really your security apparatus. And now you essentially have your own security operations center with the people and the technology, all powered by Arctic Wolf.
Yep.
Again, very high level overview of that, but just so you have an idea of
it's
kind of
fantastic. And there are a couple things that really resonate with me when I think about that. And, one of them is, you mentioned putting agents on the box and being able to do, to isolate a laptop, for example. And the example that I always use is, let's just say that I click on a link in my email, right? And download a payload, you would know that immediately and be able to isolate my laptop from the network so that I wouldn't propagate it. And so we call this minimizing the damage, right? So we have an opportunity. I may get ransomware on my laptop, but I'm not going to get ransomware on my file server because you isolated. And so you're able to shut down network traffic immediately to that device. And that is just fantastic. And the other thing that really jumps out at me is not just, putting an agent on and looking at the Windows logs, for example, but being able to analyze the network traffic and look for all different kinds of indicators of compromise. So no matter what the bad guys do, and the picture that I get in my mind is somebody, trying to, walk down the hallway and, steal some jewels or a picture or whatever. And there are all these radar, infrared lights going all over the place, and they trip one of those, right? And that's really what it means to trip an IOC. And as soon as that happens, we know about it. It's absolutely incredible to have that level of comfort that somebody is watching the store all the time, right? Just for those types of things. So it's a phenomenal opportunity. We're gonna talk about cloud risk and managed risk in detail in future webinars, so we won't drill into that. But this is another perspective really about the operations and the MDR kind of architecture in itself. So I don't think we'll go into a lot of detail here, but is there anything that you want to reflect on real quick on this, Dimitri?
Yeah, I think the big point here, right, is it is a full platform, again, that you can see covers a lot of different aspects. And again, it's a different way to look at very similar data from the previous slide, but the point here is really it's a broadly distributed set of tools and methodologies that all come together to offer that kind of holistic approach to a security operations center.
Yeah, excellent. That, we talked about the devices that you put agents on, but what about the devices that you don't, right? So you're also able to monitor those.
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, right? So because it's not just about the agents, right? And this is where, again, if you look at endpoint, you have to have an agent running on an endpoint. Right. You're not going to have that on a printer, right? You're not going to have that on a bunch of these devices. Because we have that sensor that's tapped into the network, we can automatically see and detect every one of those devices that doesn't have an agent. Maybe somebody didn't load an agent for whatever reason, right? Again, you may have somebody that's now on your network that isn't part of of your, of your team that doesn't have an agent, we can't contain them, but now we see them. And that's a very simple way to detect actually if somebody's on your network that shouldn't be. So again, we are trying to approach this from every possible angle. And by collecting all of this data in a centralized place, it allows us to really, again, provide that full broad visibility and catch things from a lot of different angles that otherwise might be missed.
Yep. So I like this slide because this is kind of the, like, what's going on behind the curtain, right? So
yes.
you can just kind of walk us through. And again, there's a lot of information here. So just highlight a little bit, but maybe you can talk through some of these points.
Yeah, so this has to do again with, one of the differences, one of the many, many differences of Arctic Wolf is we didn't just take somebody else's SIM and slap it behind a nice pretty portal and say, we have this new operations security center and right now we're your tool of choice. We built something from the ground up specifically to scale to a large level and to be able to address this very wide range of data sources. And so if you kind of think back to the two previous slides, we are ingesting just an immense amount of data from a raw telemetry perspective, right? Just data points. And so kind of as a we'll call an average customer of about 500 users, so 450 users, right? 4 sensors. So this would be the physical appliances and about 150 servers. So kind of typical comparison. We're going to see 165 million observations per week. It's just a lot of data. It is a lot of data. So what do you do with that, right? So we've built the backend platform from a technology stack perspective to sift through in real time and analyze that data in real time to see what are the anomalies, what are the potential issues that we should look at. And so for somebody like this, we'd see roughly 765 investigations per week. Now, investigations literally mean hands on keyboard, within our ISOC, digging through this and analyzing what's going on. Is this an incident? Is this not? And the point of this, though, is that we're doing this behind the scenes. So our customers don't have to, because if somebody had to triage 700 plus items a week, that's how things get missed, right?
But how about 165 million events? Because this is what, and it's astounding to me. It's just staggering, the number of, it's not just false positives, right? They come from a lot of the investigations, but they're really all false positives. But the reality is, if you collected your own logs in a SIM and you had to review them, you would have to review that many activities, and it's impossible. It's not that it's not practical, it's that it's impossible, right, to do it.
And this goes back to the R&D and all of those other components, is that because we have those tools in place, we're able to very quickly teach our systems to sift through the noise and correlate that data against other customer environments to see, again, right, if we've detected something once, if we figured out a run book for something once, it's now available for everybody. And same thing from an attack. If we've actually had multiple cases of this where we've picked up a new type of attack for one customer, we actually will go through and proactively see how that affects, and does it affect anybody else, and proactively work with all of those that otherwise would never have known. But one of the key things here is that from the last bit of 1 to 2 tickets per week, this is again where our concierge security team really comes into play. We're taking all the way from 165 million to what are the actual actionable things you really need to look at.
That's right.
And here are the specific things you need to do, right? So it's not you have a problem somewhere over there, go fix it. It's, this is exactly what the issue is. Let us help you and walk you through exactly what the remediation steps are.
Yep.
Right. I'll kind of, your home security analogy, right? A lot of those motion sensors now are like, we'll tell you if it's a cat or a dog walking, we won't alert. Very similar concept, right? There's a lot of false positives that otherwise could come up.
That's
we
right.
take all of that out.
Yep. And what that means to me is when you get 2 tickets a week, you better pay attention to them.
Yes. So when you get that call, it's serious.
Yeah. This is a great concept, the alert fatigue. And, as many, I have no concept of time, so it could have been yesterday or 10 years ago, one of those two. No, it was 10 years ago, I'm sure of it. I remember having a conversation with a CISO at an enterprise, and they said, look, we need a managed security provider that doesn't just forward everything back to us, right? Because that was the managed security world at that point. We've evolved a lot since then, right? But I think, sifting through the false positives is a critical element of this solution, and just eliminating that from the attention span, right? The active cycles that we all have, you just eliminate that, right? So it's a great slide that represents that, but the numbers are just staggering. If you want to just kind of walk us through this real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to both the previous slide and some of the things we talked about with the other breaches, right? The reality is, and we've talked about this, we talk about alert fatigue and security, but it's something that's prevalent everywhere, right? The more data you have, the more likely you are to just ignore it, because I've seen that before. And right, guilty as charged. When I was on the admin side a long time ago, right? You come in, everything's green, things start to turn yellow and red, and you kind of look at, it's okay. I know that one. It's fine. That's how you get to the problems. And it's not that we don't want to deal with those issues. It's we just don't have the time. Because when you look at, again, hundreds of millions or billions of events, how in the world are you going to deal with that, right? It's when you have that much noise, ultimately it is just noise. And so that's really where we can come in and help. And we sift through the noise to really get you what's the stuff that actually matters versus the false positives, the noise. But more importantly, we can also help you tune your systems so that the noise goes away, right? And we've had this with a lot of our customers where we've helped them configure their tools so they stop reporting on the false positives, so nobody has to deal with it, right? But when you have just that much sheer data, it's inevitable that if you're dealing with it, you're gonna just ignore a lot of it.
And we have entire industries that are motivated to generate even more data, right? So this problem's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's only getting worse. It's only getting worse.
It's gonna get worse. So I have a couple more slides that I think are just really specific to, the Arctic Wolf special sauce. And it's important, but this is, when you talk about MDR, this is really the let's just cut to the chase and say, this is what MDR is, right? I think this slide does a really good job of articulating that. Any comments?
Yeah, again, I think, right, you go back to it's not one or two things. It is all of those things combined. I think one of the interesting things to me was that, again, if you look at the stats of, as we onboard customers, 70% of the customers that we onboard have latent threats that we discover as we deploy our solutions. And it's not because they don't have the tools. In fact, one of the great things about Arctic Wolf is we leverage the tools you already have in place, right? We're not replacing all the technology you've already implemented. We're working alongside it. So the tools are there, and yet 70% of our customers still have those latent threats. Yeah. That to me was a very staggering statistic. That again, that's something we help with. But to your point, Steve, right? Not only do we detect it, but it's that 24/7. Somebody's watching your environment, right? When we go back to the earlier slides of Friday, 6 p.m., we're still there, right? We're there 24/7.
Really good anecdotal stories about exactly that happening, and I'm going to save them for later. But if we start running out of time, I'm going to get them in because they're really meaningful. That drives me home. Yeah. But that is a staggering number, by the way. 70% of onboarded customers, already have a latent issue.
So I'll mention just one real quick, and this was actually, I was talking to one of our CSC this morning. They had a customer that they were onboarding, and in the process of onboarding, they called the customer and said, "Hey, we're picking up some command and control activity." And that was actually, we just had we just had an insurance claim, we got hacked, we just had incident response. Yeah. So we just dealt with it. We're like, no, you don't understand.
It's happening right now.
We're still seeing this today.
That's right.
And they had no idea because they went through incident response. They're like, hey, we're done.
Flips up the laptop bag and walks out the door, and the problem's still going on.
Exactly.
Yep. This is, again, I just go back to this 24/7, we call it 24/7 eyes on glass, but somebody is watching all the time. So if you're a bad guy, it's hard to get away with anything when somebody's watching. That's the reality of it. So I want to talk about this a little bit because this says a lot, right? But maybe you can just kind of take us through each of these items. And we talked about dwell time a little bit, but I think you really kind of cut to the chase here.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned this earlier too, right? I mean, a lot of times somebody will be in your systems for a very long time before you even know, right? So what we found, again, an absolutely staggering statistic in my mind is, right, 206 days as the average to identify an intrusion.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
The amount of things that can be done in 200 plus days is just insane. For us, right, our SLA to our customers is 30 minutes, and we actually have a significantly lower target, right? So, right, the analogy that one of my folks uses is, right, when you call the cops, right, when there's something that happens at home, right? So going back to the home security, if somebody breaks down your door and you have that security system, it calls the cops, and you don't want them there in 200 days. You want them there now.
Your number either. You don't want to have to actually, do it.
Exactly, right? It's supposed to be automated. We do that. And it's supposed to be fast. We do that, right? Because otherwise, I mean, let's be honest, 200 days, forget about it. Yep. We keep seeing a staggering and growing amount of phishing attacks that, again, are missed by email security, right? It's not that they don't have it. It's just hackers are getting smarter. So that's something that again, we've caught that has been missed by other tools. And again, we talked about account takeover and other threats, but I guess the point that I'll just make here is we keep seeing a growing number of attacks and susceptible, attack vectors for customers. And it's something that we're really adamant about helping our customers with, not only again, detecting and helping them prevent it, but really making sure that if something happens, we're able to very quickly respond and remediate those things.
And we just got a notification to be on the lookout from Arctic Wolf, to be on the lookout for a targeted phishing attack that was, using DHL and FedEx emails, right? Mm-hmm. So most of these tools that you referred to already, they're just going to pass FedEx emails right through because it's a trusted name. And the point in this is that the attackers are getting smarter, yeah. Right? So it's there's an evolution. There's no question, and we have to continue to evolve with it. So we're not going to touch on all these things, but I like this slide because it really speaks to the comprehensive nature of the solution, and some of it, like the proactive piece, we have a webinar dedicated to manage risk and the proactive piece. But I like how your team, Dimitri, has really articulated a reactive and an active piece. So again, we won't focus on the proactive right now, but if you think about, MDR is reactive, right? It's detection. You're detecting an intruder, right? So there's somebody there that shouldn't be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that something bad has happened. And I think, it's about catching it after compromise, but before breach, right? Or don't let an event become an incident, or however you want to frame it up. But it all boils down to this time on the network, right? If somebody has 2 days to figure out how to cause you harm to make you pay $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, right? Depending on who you are, they can do a lot of damage in 2 days. They can do a tremendous amount of damage in 206 days, right? But in minutes they can't. But is there anything about this? Just one thing, and we're kind of running out of time. We got quite a few slides to get through yet. So, is there anything specific about this that you want to call out? Or
the only thing I'll say is, right, I mean, there are other folks that are looking at MDR offerings. I think again that the challenge is if you just have the reactive component, it's not enough, right? The active aspect of the concierge security team that Arctic Wolf brings to the table is a huge game changer. And you have to have, again, we'll touch on the proactive at a later point, like you said, but you really have to have all of those. You have to have the active component without it, you're still leaving yourself susceptible.
Yep. The one point I want to make that I didn't make earlier, you see all those compliance tags down at the bottom, right? So if you're in an industry that compliance is important to, having a solution like this in place will likely help a lot in certain controls that are required for that compliance requirement. CMMC, which is not on this list, we're talking a lot about these days because it's really pervasive, and the federal government is getting, really strict about requirements and those kind of things. And if you're going to do business with the government, you have to do these things, right? So it's not optional. It's a have to. And what I'll say about this solution is that we can help meet those requirements quickly, right out of the gate. So deploy the solution to meet the requirements. It's that quick. So I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about, MDR and SOC Plus and how we leverage all of the things that you have. And then we add a couple things to it, right? So our one team is our internal brand at ASMGi that we use to, to fit this solution under, right? But one team is basically, the concept is that we're an extension of the customer's team and that we'll do it for you, right? So we want you to get the benefits without the burden. And that's really I think just very synergistic to what you've talked about a lot, Dimitri, and doing the work and rolling up your sleeves and getting it done. You have to have that human component and that operational aspect. It's not just about buying technology. And in fact, the way we say this a lot of times is, we talk about old thinking, this point solution mentality, which is very product driven, right? Versus a more holistic mentality, which I think is consistent with a lot of the things that you've talked about. And just, one team is a total solution. So we have a phrase at ASMGi that says a total solution equals the program plus the technology plus the operations. And, our mantra is if you're missing any one of those pillars, it's not a total solution. And so it's probably under-deployed or under-adopted or underutilized. And you certainly don't get the value that you expected from it. So we try to make sure that all of that stuff is included. And then, so our MDR MSOC Plus solution, it really includes everything that you guys have. And then we just take it a little bit further, right? So on an incident response TAN, you talked about doing the containment, right? So we leverage NIST 861 R2 as a framework for our incident response. And certainly containment is a part of that, right? So if we can automate that containment piece, that's really cool. And it also it shortens that time to value, right? And if we can keep the intruders off your network and shorten the time that they have the ability to maneuver and cause harm, right? That's a good thing. So we'll leverage all of that. But then, we also want to be able to do the full incident response. So that includes building a program, like an incident response plan. If you don't have one, we'll build it. If you have one, then we'll modify it and make sure that it's commensurate with the program and all of the contact information and all those people that really matter. Program plus technology plus operations will do a lot of the incident response. So I read an article the other day that talked about, good intentions. Everybody wants to, do right for their company, most likely, except for bad actors, right? But aside from that, but when ransomware hits, everybody's motivation is really about getting the business back in operations. And so you can really lose sight of, taking your time and preserving data and preserving evidence and doing all those things. So, and quite honestly, with OFAC, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you pay a ransom to, somebody who's on a list, for example, as a bad actor and not to do transaction with. So our statement there is just leverage the guys that know what they're doing and guys and gals that know what they're doing, and then we'll do it for you, right? So in any event, it's having a structured approach. We'll write the program. We'll also include a tabletop. So that's the other thing about incident response, in my opinion, that becomes critically important is practice, right? So even if we're going to leverage your security concierges a lot, which we do, we have to know to call them, right? We have to know who in our department or who in our company is going to make the call and at what point and who's going to, all of these things. They all have to be mapped out. So practicing it in a tabletop exercise is critical, in my opinion. You don't want an actual incident to be when you're trying to figure out what to do, right? So that's pretty much all I have to say from an MDR standpoint. It's a very comprehensive program. We'll talk more about the vulnerability management as part of the risk on March 25th. But from a cyber incident response and forensic standpoint, we'll do all of that. One of the ways that we differentiate, I guess, between what we do and what we don't do, if it's internal, like cleaning up the mess and doing the forensic investigation, if that's required, we'll do all of those internal things. If something happens like Equifax or whatever, and you have to get credit protection for 300 million people, we're not going to do that, right? So those external things are not really part of this program. But again, I think it's critical to understand that we can really help, like right now, by leveraging all of the stuff that we spent a lot of time just kind of going through, right? And all of these things that you do really well. And then we'll just take it a little bit further from that perspective. So, and then the other thing I like to mention real quickly is that, Gartner has a maturity model around SOCs, and it includes components, functional things that you should be doing. All of these are part of your program, right? These are all part of the MDR MSOC Plus program. These are all things that you're already doing, even the security orchestration, right? The automated isolation and those kind of things. So what I tell companies is that we can go from 0 to 60 just in under 3 seconds, right? We can get you to a maturity level that's very high, like right out of the gate with this program. And so anyway, I wanted to go back and I told you I was going to get this story in, and I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to say it really quickly. The amount of time that the bad actors spend on your network is critical. And what I have a couple of examples. One of them is for me personally. So I was on my laptop, and my daughter is in grade school, and I was going to read a book for her class, and she's doing all her schooling remotely. So I was going to be a guest reader, right? And so I sent an email to the teacher, sent me an email back. I had to blah, blah, blah. I had to download this software on my laptop to record me reading this book. And so I started doing this, and I'm partway into it, and I get a call from my CTO, and he says, "Hey, did you just download this software?" And I was like, well, that's just awesome. I was very blown away that within minutes, right, I downloaded software and we knew about it, right? It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. The only way we knew about it is somebody was watching for that, right? It's an indicator of compromise if software is installed. And so this actually happened to a customer, but it was a little bit different scenario. And this is part of the MDR program. They're a user of Office 365. Their operations are all in the US. They have multiple locations, but they're all in the continental US. And there was a login with his credentials from somewhere else outside of the US. I think it was Nigeria, right? Immediately, within minutes, we were notified somebody's logging in with this account. And so we immediately took action, logged him out of every application that he was in, changed his password, blah, 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 zero harm. And that's a huge success story, in my opinion, because we took an event that could have easily gone awry, right? If somebody does an account takeover, their intention is not good, right? They're going to do something bad and damage will be inflicted. It could be fraud. They could get somebody to send them money. Who knows, right? Nobody really knows what they would have done, but absolutely positive they would have done something bad. So we prevented it, zero incident. And that is huge, right? That is huge. And that's why we're having this conversation today, quite honestly, so that we can build more of those types of stories. So I wanted to just go through some key takeaways real quick. And I some of these I'll skip over, but leverage the investments you already have and the information you already have. So most people have already made investments in tools and techniques and technologies, right? And they already have a tremendous amount of data. So let's leverage all of that stuff and pull it together to deliver a solution. MDR will stop attacks that other methods miss. And I think this showed up on a couple of your slides with phishing and various different techniques that things are getting past. EDR is notorious for this, right? They'll just miss something occasionally, or if it happens from a device that doesn't have an agent on it, or those kind of things. You don't have to caught in the buy security frenzy, right? So people are spending a lot of money on security, not necessarily lowering their risk or improving their security posture. Dwell time is critically important, and a fast time to response is critically important. So I already mentioned this, but type yes if you want us to register for those events. And we've got time for a couple questions. So let me just see what we got here. Oh, I'm trying to figure out how to get to questions. I have a couple of questions. So we talked about EDR. Actually, one of the questions that I'm looking at right now is talking about EDR and what's the difference. If I already have EDR, do I need MDR? And I think you elaborated a little bit on that, Dimitri. Do you want to reflect on that quickly? Looks like another question. We're pretty much on premise, including Exchange, but we'll move to the cloud shortly, both Office 365 and Azure. Can you help us plan for this? And will this service address those environments? So I guess that's the part of the question that we can speak to. You know, will this service address those environments, Office 365 and Azure? What do you think?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, you know, there are a couple of components here from a help to get to cloud. There's a lot of guidance that we can provide, but again, that's where, you know, we can partner, right? And I'm sure you guys have some other tools and guidance that you can help as well from an actual, you know, migration perspective, things like that. But certainly from a CST perspective, there's a lot of information that we have gathered from other customers, so we can definitely give guidance on best practices and things to implement. But certainly as you move from on-prem to cloud-based services, there are definitely some things to keep in mind. And that's something that not only can we give you guidance on, but make sure that we're implementing as part of your security journey, make sure that we're configuring things properly, right? Make sure that we're implementing things the right way from day one, and also making sure that we're getting the right log data, right? We're seeing everything from all of those components as well, so that, again, we're providing that full security protection across the board.
Yep. Another question, what if my insurance company tells me who I have to use for incident response?
Yeah, so from an Arctic Wolf perspective, again, one of the value adds that we'll provide is that regardless of who you're working with, right, whether it's part of an insurance incident or not, we're there as an extension all the time. So unfortunately, right, we've had customers that again have dealt with IR incidents, and one of the values for us is we're not going to give you, oh, no, nobody's going to be there for 72 hours or 48 hours or whatnot. So you're kind of left in the dark. We're going to be there throughout that entire process, right? We never go away. Right? That's the nice thing about us. We're always there. Whether it's somebody new to your environment, whether it's an IR incident, we're always there with the full picture, with the historical data, right? So we're there, again, just throughout the entire process, no matter what.
Yep. Yeah, and I would add to that, if it's MDR and SOC plus, then there'll be an incident response plan, right? So we'll follow that, exactly. Follow the plan. No insurance company is going to say, don't isolate our laptop, right? But we're going to work with the company to figure out what are the rules of engagement, right? Yep. So what activities can we, what incidents or things can we take action on immediately, and what things do we want to run by you first? So we'll cover that. But the other thing I think that's critical to highlight here is that we'll make it a lot easier, even if the insurance company says, hey, this is the company that has to do incident response. Most of the time, as an incident responder, most of the time you'll walk into an environment blind. You don't know anything about. Yeah. You don't know what happened. If it's ransomware, you don't know what kind of ransomware it is, what devices are affected. You don't know anything, right? And so you start from zero. We know a lot of stuff immediately, right? By virtue of having all these things in place. And we've already raised the flag that there's an incident going on, right? So we're already starting the investigation. We're providing a lot of information. So we will make any incident responder that the insurance company, whether it's an internal employee or if they say you have to use a certain company, we'll make them more efficient. And I think it's a critical point that people miss out on all the time, because but it's real. It's very real. And and then the other thing, I guess the third thing that I would say on that is, rarely, to your point, I think you mentioned response time, right? A lot of insurance companies, they go with the bigs like FireEye, for example, right? And then, they say, yeah, we'll get there in 2 weeks. And, we could be there like right now in it. And so insurance companies aren't going to wait 2 weeks if they can have a responder immediately. So rarely do we have an issue, even if an insurance company has a list of designated respondents, rarely do we have that issue. We just have a conversation. And obviously insurance is going to be involved. If you have cyber insurance, they're going to be involved. And we'll be careful to make sure that we don't void policies and those kind of things. But in any event, we're over on time. It's 2:07, so I think we'll wrap it up. We have a couple of questions left. We'll try to bundle those up. We're going to send the slides out. Please, if you're interested in being registered for the webinar, just enter yes into the question box and send that back in. And thank you, Dimitri, for all your great insights. It's been wonderful. And we're going to do this again 2 more times. So March 25th is the second one and April 8th being the third one.
My pleasure. And thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing everybody again in a few weeks.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.